In 1982, the Army created the first Special Operations Command. Headquartered at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, SOCOM is the single command headquarters for all of the Army Special Operations Forces worldwide. The mission of SOCOM, the Special Operations Command, is unique and diverse and includes Special Forces, Rangers, Psychological Operations, Civil Affairs, and Special Operations Aviation. Special operations are nothing new to the American soldier. In fact, this country's first unconventional forces operated during the French and Indian Wars and became famous as Rogers Rangers. The tradition continued in the Revolutionary War with Francis Marion, the South Carolina Swamp Fox, whose troops harassed the British with a success out of all proportion to their small numbers. In the Civil War, John Mosby formed a band of Confederate raiders that became the terror of Union generals, cutting off communications and supplies behind the lines. But it was during World War II that Special Operations troops finally came into their own. In quick succession, the public soon knew the names of such units as the Devil's Brigade, Darby's Rangers, and Merrill's Marauders. These were the units that received much of the press during World War II, and it was the application of some of these first unconventional principles that became the basis of the modern special operations. At the same time that the Devil's Brigade was fighting in France and Italy, and Darby's Rangers were scaling the cliffs of Normandy on D-Day, and Merrill's Marauders were slashing their way through the Burmese jungle, a new kind of special operations, taking a bit from each, was being formed. It had no name yet, but the agency that was developing these new techniques was called the Office of Strategic Services. The primary operation of the OSS during the war was called the Jedburgh Mission. It consisted of dropping three-man teams into France, Belgium, and Holland, where they trained partisans and conducted guerrilla operations against the Germans in preparation for the D-Day invasion. After the war, President Truman disbanded the OSS, but its legacy is still felt today, because from its nucleus of men and techniques came a bold idea for a new organization that went against the grain of traditional concepts. But the Army was finally ready for it, and in 1952, with a total strength of 10 men, the Special Forces, better known as the Green Berets, was born. Trained at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, they were among the first American advisors in Vietnam in 1956. In that same year, the first American soldier died in Vietnam, Special Forces Captain Harry Kramer, Jr. Throughout the remainder of the 50s and early 60s, the number of Special Forces military advisors in Vietnam increased steadily. Their responsibility was to train South Vietnamese soldiers in the arts of counterinsurgency and to mold various native tribes into a credible anti-communist threat. The 5th Special Forces Group set up permanent headquarters in Nha Trang in 1965, and by the time the 5th left Vietnam, its troops had won 16 of the 17 Medals of Honor awarded to Special Forces soldiers in Vietnam, 60 Distinguished Service Crosses, 814 Silver Stars, 13,234 Bronze Stars, and thousands of other medals, awards, and citations. It was a brilliant record. But while the Special Forces have received much of the public attention in recent years, a less well-known but just as effective fighting force had spent the last 3 decades carving their own piece of American history. The modern-day Rangers have proven themselves the rightful successors to the legendary Darby's Rangers and Merrill's Marauders of World War II. The Rangers have had an often interrupted history in the post-World War II era. Deactivated in 1945, they remained out of commission until the Korean War. Activated again, 7 Ranger companies saw action in Korea in 1950 and 1951. In Korea, the Rangers fought almost every type of battle imaginable: combat jumps, river crossings, behind-the-lines raids, and conventional assaults. Again out of action following the Korean War, it was not until late in the 1960s when Ranger companies were again reactivated. The new Ranger companies were sent to Vietnam, where they fought mainly as long-range reconnaissance patrols. Their mission was to penetrate jungles far from regular American units, watch and gather strategic intelligence on enemy strengths, communication lines, and unit movements. Following Vietnam, independent Ranger companies were replaced with battalions. They were once again the light infantry spearhead of the Army.
Tell Mr. Reagan all Canadians are happy to know that he took this step in time to save our life, and may God bless him.
In 1983, these new Rangers led the assault on Grenada, jumping in to capture the island airstrip, paving the way for the 82nd Airborne Division. And in 1986, at Fort Benning, Georgia, the 75th Infantry Regiment became the 75th Ranger Regiment. The Rangers had become an integral part of the Army's Special Operations Force. The fabled history of Special Forces and Rangers has often overshadowed other Special Operations Forces. But these are the units whose battlefield contributions are equally startling. In command language, they are known as force multipliers and do their job of causing the enemy trouble without having to fire a shot. The first of these is Psychological Operations, or PSYOPs. PSYOPs units first saw extensive action during the Vietnam War. The 4th Psychological Operations Group, located at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, is the only active-duty unit of its type in the U.S. Army. Members of the 4th Psychological Operations Group are skilled in the art and science of psychological warfare. They design and control efforts to alter the psychological environment of the battlefield and affect audiences far beyond the confines of the combat area. In specific campaigns developed for a theater of operations, they can disseminate information by loudspeaker broadcasts, leaflet drops, photographs, and posters, as well as radio and television programs using the most sophisticated production equipment available anywhere today.
We're coming to studio in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Another one-of-a-kind unit in the Army is the 96th Civil Affairs Battalion, also located at Fort Bragg. This airborne unit is of prime importance to any tactical commander because of its ability to prevent civilian interference with tactical operations, assisting the commander in discharging his responsibilities with respect to the civilian populace, and providing liaison with civilian governmental agencies. Civil affairs teams strive to bring order out of chaos by helping to develop local projects useful to the host country, such as public works, agriculture, transportation, communications, health and sanitation, and others vital to economic and social development. These types of actions often result in improved civilian support for national objectives.
297, wind 210 at 6, clear to 9 runway 27.
Say again with 297.
297, wind 210 at
The final component of Special Operations is Task Force 160. This highly secret aviation unit spends much of its time training at night to provide support for Special Operations forces. Their efforts have been instrumental in developing new techniques which have significantly improved the battlefield capabilities of Army aviation. Battle-tested in Grenada, Task Force 160 flew aviation support missions for ground forces on the island. The men from Darby's Rangers and Merrill's Marauders were the pioneers of modern unconventional warfare, and many of their ideas have become Army doctrine. Combined with modern battlefield techniques and highly sophisticated equipment, the diverse elements of the Special Operations Command gives a unity of purpose and the guidance necessary for warfare in the 1980s and beyond. Living a legacy and building on it, the 1st Special Operations Command continues to be Sine Pari, without equal.